Welcome to the Savage Worlds GM podcast. I'm your host, Jared Savage Daddy Gunning. Tonight's episode brought to you by Roll20.net, the world's largest virtual tabletop. Check them out today at Roll20.net. Follow the show. We're on the social media, SWGM Podcast on Facebook and on Twitter. Go ahead and visit us on Patreon. Throw us a buck, SWGM Podcast. Like, subscribe, and share on the YouTube channel, Savage Worlds Game Master Podcast, and the same moniker on iTunes, Savage Worlds Game Master Podcast. Tonight's topic, cinematic role-playing with Savage Worlds. And here to discuss it, some call him Jib.
What?
Vichat Jib. And Dave, the rules Maven Scott.
There are no rules in Savage Worlds for cinematic roleplay.
And Chris, the Savage Mommy Fox.
Coming soon to Vero.
Oh no, let's not start that. Okay, so if you happen to be watching the live stream on YouTube, feel free to participate in the chat. One quick thing though, all devices down. According to Chris, you have to turn all devices off before you can participate in the chat.
Oh, then I'll have to drop off because I'm doing this silly thing on a device. So
not you. Are you involved in the chat? Did you stream live stream? No, you're part of the show.
Oh, okay.
Obviously, the rules don't apply. All right,
cool. Rules don't apply to me. I am there.
So let's go ahead and have a quick chat. What we mean when we're talking about cinematic. I prefer to use the word cinematic versus pulpy.
Well, so you're not talking Indiana Jones?
Indiana Jones is cinematic. Absolutely.
I would agree with that, and I totally agree with your assertion that pulp and cinematic are not the same thing. Or when I say all pulp is cinematic, all cinematic is not pulp.
There you go. Well said. Well said indeed. So what do we mean when we're talking about cinematic? Well, we're talking about cinematic. We're talking about things that are pretty much over the top. Fast-paced. A la like a movie. Or cinemas.
Which means you have to paint a really nice picture if you're going to do cinematic. Especially if you're not using maps and minis, paint that picture.
Well, I think that you can be cinematic with minis. I don't know that those two things are mutually exclusive.
That's what I'm saying. If you're not using minis, you need to even paint the picture even more.
Now that I totally agree with.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Okay.
Yeah, the fewer handouts, physical things that you can give your players as reference, the more you're going to have to be verbose with descriptions, and you better give dripping narrative. That said, I think one of the things that comes up the most when it comes to this topic are people who are like, Savage Worlds is 2, and then they insert that horrible word that's about orange juice. And they play that off that's because it's designed only for, like an Indiana Jones style game. But I think a key part that's missing is people aren't thinking of the abstraction that goes into Savage Worlds properly. So, I mean, if we look at, a gun does 2d6 points of damage. There's 12 different handguns. They do 2d6 plus 1, 2d6 minus 1, or 2d6. And then Bolt does the same. Why? Because we're only concerned what small arms does as far as damage in a very abstract sense. It doesn't matter that one gun has a bullet that's going to ricochet around inside your body more, or another one that's got over-penetration, or a third one that's going to leave a large, gaping exit wound. They're all small arms and therefore do 2d6 points of damage in our nice abstract system.
Right. Well, okay. The word cinematic basically describes, as Jared mentioned earlier, a movie framing of how things look and feel and how the action works. And this is on a sliding scale of, realism versus
the rule of
something
cool.
else. Okay?
Rule of cool.
And cinematic kind of falls somewhere in the middle because it kind of looks and feels potentially real, but little things like, reloading and,
a shotgun that knocks you back.
Shock, from hydrostatic shock from wounds and things like that don't really play into the into the storytelling, because they don't really contribute to the storytelling.
Right. It's about, and okay. Let's just sometimes the easiest way to explain what something is by example. So here's what I think. Here's what my opinion of a cinematic role playing game system is, and why Savage Worlds fits that mold. Doing it, like one of the things Dave said, very abstracted. We're not worried about verisimilitude at all. We don't care about, oh, come on, you could never do that in the real world. Because when I go to sit down and I pay my $13 to go watch Vin Diesel in a Fast and Furious movie, I want to see cars do amazing shit that I will never see a car do. That's why I paid the money. Now, I do not want to worry about whether it damages the car when it hits the ground. Oh, is the guy behind the wheel, is he shocked from the impact? Oh, wait, how could you possibly swerve through an office building, come out the glass side of another office building, and a trajectory land in a parking structure next door, and then chase somebody down all the way down? I don't want the guy sitting in the movie theater next to me going, "Oh, come on." That's not what I'm looking for in a cinematic game. I want the guy sitting next to me going, "Holy shit, that was freaking cool!"
Right. Well, I also don't want to deal with minutia.
I think there's a limit too, where if you do want the guy sitting next to you to go, "Oh, come on," and call you on that and have it not occur, Savage Worlds arms you with the ability to do that. We don't need a mechanic that replicates reality, because chasing that doesn't make any sense. So in Savage Worlds, if you take a fall, it's 1d6 per 5 feet that you fell plus 1. That's the damage you're going to take, and then you figure out how far your character fell and you roll it. We don't need to find out the coefficient of how powerful gravity is times your weight to figure out whether or not you reach terminal velocity, right, to calculate the absolute amount of damage that your character took, because you're suddenly on Venus instead of on Earth and it has a different gravity coefficient. No, we know that you're going to take 1d6 plus 1 points of damage for falling on a standard gravity planet, and on a double gravity planet, it's going to be 2d6 per 5 feet. And on a half gravity planet, it's going to be 1d6 per 10 feet. And we just call it good and we move on, because we don't need that level of minutia, as Jiv was saying, to get the game where we need it to be. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that as a GM, if I'm running a more gritty, realistic game, and you go, "Well, I want to drive through the office building and jump to the neighboring highway," that, I'm not going to say, "Give me a driving roll." You figure that that's a bad idea. Right. You know you're not going to make that jump, because I've just taken the game and used the same mechanic that would have allowed you to make that jump in a more, pulpy game, and made it more gritty. All within Savage Worlds, all without a setting rule. Savage Worlds gives you that because of its abstraction. Both can be cinematic.
Absolutely, both can be cinematic. And yes, I totally agree. Cinematic is more abstract than realism or representationalism. I think the biggest thing that cinematic does, in my opinion, is it gives you the chance to be bigger and more spectacular than you could be otherwise. Okay. In the real world, I'm a fairly fit guy. I'm not sure how long I can long jump, but I certainly cannot jump over, buildings or anything like that. But in a cinematic game, I might very well be able to make that jump across a road 4 lanes wide to jump to the next building, because it's cinematic.
Right. Or fight on the hood of cars on a freeway, jumping from one car to the next while you're having that fight. And body slam, you slide down the hood, you almost fall off, but you grab at the last minute. Now you're standing on the hood and you do the Bruce Lee thing, like a whole Matrix truck semi-scene combat on a moving platform.
And the interesting aspect to me is it all depends on the personal lens of you and your group to define what cinematic means for you. Because if cinematic for you means The Matrix versus cinematic for you means, say, Enter the Fist, those are two very divergent ends of that spectrum that are very different in feel. One is going to feel far more grounded in reality, but it's still not real. It's still cinema. And you still can capture that by just having florid descriptions and having, using the abstraction built into the system to achieve it without having to go, well, Savage Worlds can't do X because the mechanic is abstract. No, you're failing to utilize that mechanic to the best of its capacity, or you're completely missing that there might be a different mechanic. Setting rules make a huge difference in this. Play a game once with the official gritty damage rules out of the book, and you will suddenly see how much more quickly combats come to a crashing end.
Right, and the thing too, it's all about your style of cinema as well. Your cinema can be brutal, deadly, but still also high action.
Grindhouse.
Yeah, exactly. You can totally do Grindhouse in Savage Worlds easily. And I think the thing that we're saying about Savage Worlds is it is bare bones to the point where it's up to your interpretation on how big of a scope that rule of cool is, which rules apply to make it that way, to dial it into complete over-the-top talking dogs, surfing, hood surfing, Teen Wolf, 1980s, super badass. Oh my God, I can't believe they did that in a movie versus like running a version of Aliens, like a high action sci-fi marine situation. Those
Aliens,
are both two
Aliens
separate.
is still cinematic.
Yeah, well, yeah, but there's two separate styles of quote unquote cinematic.
Yeah, if you're going to quote a movie from the universe, the original comes the closest to being uncinematic in the terms that we're talking about. But even that, again, is dripping cinematic appeal in all the little, everybody's sweating and the ship has moisture condensing in places. I mean, they took it to the level to make it entertaining, and that's what you have to do, even in, let's say you're running Realms of Cthulhu. Realms of Cthulhu is exceptionally gritty. And if you don't go over the top with descriptions that capture that atmosphere and feel, you're going to lose your players.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And so, since we're talking about Aliens, the whole Aliens franchise, let's take a look at that for a second. One of the great cinematic pieces of that is that the alien has acid for blood.
Mm-hmm.
So fire bullets at it all you want. Probably not a great idea at close range.
Probably not.
Or on a spaceship or any kind of...
Another thing that's a hallmark of cinematic is it doesn't care about physics so much. It has its own notion of physics.
Yeah, I would agree with the second version of that. Yeah,
and things that are not, and things, physics yields to the adventure. Physics yields to the over the top nature of things going on.
Right. It's dialed into its own universe. For example, a big thing in a lot of cinematic action is I can punch you with a nice right hook and send you flying back through the air 8 to 10 feet, crashing into shit behind you.
Yeah.
You're talking about a superhero movie. I can throw you around where you crash into buildings and take them out and just stand up from the rubble and brush it off.
Well, I mean, let's be fair. You don't have to go so far as a superhero movie. You can just go with basically any action adventure movie made after 1980, and I guarantee in at least one scene, someone's going through a wall. Now, I don't know about you, but in a fit of rage when I was younger, I punched a few walls, and you will only occasionally break through, depending on what that wall is made out of.
Right. And usually
there's the ever-present possibility of you breaking your freaking hand.
Right? Oh, broken bone.
I mean, let's stop and think about this in some more simulation style games. I know GURPS has got a rule for this. I know BattleTech had an entire section on this, is that when you attack somebody, you could take damage from your own attack. Right. That there were ways that you exposed it, you you didn't lock your wrist the way you're supposed to, or you didn't, or you slammed your mech into somebody and you took collision damage. You took damage from your own attack. These game systems were written to pick up on that level of verisimilitude and the minutia of it. Savage Worlds doesn't care and gives you the freedom to maybe add a setting rule in there that allows you to capture that minutia if you need it. But if you don't need it, you get rules like the drop. When do you have the drop? When the GM says you have the drop. Why is it left that wide open? Because it might be something as simple as your GM wants you to give him a stealth roll, and if you beat the other guy, you automatically got the drop. At the other end of the spectrum, it might be, okay, I need a dramatic task from you in order to achieve the drop. It doesn't matter how gritty or how hard it is to achieve it. That mechanic is so wide open, you have a spectrum upon which you can play.
Right. And so if you take a look at the dramatic task rules of Savage Worlds, what you're basically looking and seeing there is a montage. If we're going to use cinema or movie terms, you're seeing a montage or a very quick, tightly edited, fast-paced scene in a movie. And that the mechanic replicates it very perfectly, very smoothly, very easily. However, it does require you as a GM and players to bring that narrative description and sense of gravitas to it.
I was about to say that, most definitely.
You're just going, give me a fighting roll, -2, 2 successes out of 5 cards. Here comes the second card. Give me a fighting roll, -2. No, you've got to break that down and spend some time down in the nitty-gritty of that sequence, narrating what's going on, narrating the punches.
So I'm going to commit heresy for a minute. If you are playing Savage Worlds and you're not including narrative, you're just playing it for the crunchy bits, it is the most boring role-playing game on the market. Savage Worlds doesn't have enough of those little minutia rules to make the gameplay, just the rolling of the dice.
But you're not playing a role-playing game at that point, Dave. You're playing a strategy tactics game.
But I mean, let's be honest, how many times have you sat down or walked through a convention and seen people playing, whether it's D&D, Savage Worlds, any of the, even GURPS, and I was going to say, what's that one that you play so much of, Jib? Fate. I was going to say Fate, but Fate is too reliant on narrative. But there's so many of these games that you will walk by and it's, I hit him with my sword. Okay, give me a dice roll. You hit. Give me a damage roll. Okay. Next person. We've all seen it happen. We've all played in those games. We've all occasionally run those games. And we've all definitely walked past somebody else playing them. If you're doing that with Savage Worlds, you're not going to have as much fun as if you did that with D&D. Because the sheer number of rules means there's more things to do in D&D if you're simply playing the roll the dice game. If you're actually playing it as a role-play game, though, Savage Worlds abstraction gives you so much more range with each of those little, maybe not as fun mechanics. Like the dramatic task, simply put, not a great mechanic. It's not, you flip a card over, make a dice roll, and determine, is it at a -2 or a -4? I mean, that's pretty much the entirety of a dramatic task. Do this 5 times and you're done. That's not overly exciting from a roll some dice standpoint. But if you add the narrative to it, it becomes amazing.
I totally agree.
I would say the same with the chase rules as well. For as much beating up the chase rules get, I think one of the major complaints about the chase rules is seen through the lens of it being a race. And it's not a race. It's a chase. It's a 1980s Hong Kong theater running through the streets action montage.
Smokey and the Bandit.
Well, and I think there's another aspect of the chase rules as they exist that no one takes into consideration, and that is the GM is supposed to tell you at the outset how long the chase lasts, and that's how long you have to do different fun things leading up to the point that someone either gets away or gets caught. And the stuff in the middle doesn't change the gets away or gets caught time frame. You're still going to go 5 cards. You're still going to go, 10 rounds. You're still going to go however many rounds the GM sets that out for at the beginning of the chase, even if you get close enough to take a swing at them. Even if you pull the gun up and you can take a shot at them, yeah, you get to take an attack, but the chase still continues. Unless, obviously, you kill the target, I guess.
True. Now, here's the other thing, too, that's built into Savage Worlds that makes it capable of supporting cinematic play. And there are 2 key things that happen in this game system. Number 1, dice explode.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, you have bennies. If you don't like the way something went down, you can drop basically a cinematic mulligan and go, nope, this is something super cool. This needs to happen. I've got 5 bennies. I will burn every last one of these bitches to make this roll, to make that cool thing happen.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Including not getting dead.
Right.
I think we hear a lot, and we've answered several times on the show, how do I take the guy who rolled a 47 to hit and then rolls a 1 on damage, or who rolls a 47 to hit and then I spent the Benny and soaked all the damage? How do we make that exciting? And it's like there's a lot of different ways to do and we've talked about the grays and things like that. But I think one of the aspects there is that's that cognitive dissonance moment of you're playing too much of ROLL play and not enough of ROLE play. You're not bringing the narrative to that moment and making it interesting for your players. You're not putting your creativity at work to come up with an interesting, so he had you dead bang with the shotgun and racks off a shot perfectly into your face, and somehow you had the Benny and were able to soak all the damage. What's that look like? And the answer is that at the last second, you kicked the sliding door between the 2 of you closed, and it took all the damage. You didn't take away that perfect shot at your face. Here's how you didn't take damage and catch a case of the dead from what was a perfect shot by the attacker. And I think that's that interesting aspect that so many people get wrong is they go, oh, well, the Benny dropped, they soaked the damage, it never happened. And the attack never happened and move right on with no cinematic description. And that's why we get things like, Jamie Pearson's tirade here 6-8 months ago about why Bennies were the root of all evil in Savage Worlds. And come to find out he was handing out a few too many, and he was having too many of these soak moments come up where they didn't wrap the narrative around it, and he didn't manage the Benny economy well enough to not suffer that.
Well, let's give some examples for that, because I know we may have some new people in the community following the Rifts exodus, people coming into the hobby. So let's explain what that means. So let's say I get a raise on my attack roll. So in order to hit you, I got to overcome your parry with my fighting, and I've got to roll a 5 or better. And my dice explode on my hit, on my fighting attack against you, Dave, and I roll 20.
Okay.
Woo, so that's a raise, right? We only count the first 4 above what I need. We don't continue to stack them up. So I got to raise my attack roll. Great. Savage Worlds allows me to add 1 free D6 bonus damage when I roll my damage. So I roll my strength because it's a barroom brawl, and I narrate, I throw a wicked right hook and catch Dave on the chin. And here's my damage. So I pick up a D6 for the bonus damage, and I got a D6 strength, and I roll, and I get snake eyes. I roll 2.
Well, okay, this is totally why I've said over and over and over again, narrate up to the point where you know what happened.
Right, but we're talking about the way that most people do it, though, right? I kind of want to do it as an example.
You're doing it wrong.
I want to do it as an example. So I roll 2, and I do not have an edge called No Mercy that lets me reroll damage. You cannot spend bennies on damage. You don't roll a wild die on damage. It's just that 2d6 and I roll and I come up double ones.
Okay.
Now you have a toughness of 5. So in game terms, that's not even enough to shake you.
So my mage looks at you as you throw a critical hook right at my throat, and as your hand hits me in the Adam's apple, you feel a force field that you can't penetrate, as my magical defenses have defeated your attack. That's step 1. You've hit me. You hit me in a critical location, but I didn't take any damage because you didn't defeat that part of my defenses. Yeah, you got past my parry, but my defenses were still there. That's the first one off the top of my head. Next one, you didn't penetrate the armor. Third, critical hit, and unfortunately, it blew straight through and did no meaningful damage. It's a flesh wound.
It's a through and through?
It's a through and through. Flesh wound. And I didn't even feel it because it just passed right through my shoulder. I mean, I just did 3 of them off the top of my head.
Or you hit me, and I narrate your wizard, right? The wizard's head suddenly cocks 90 degrees. And when he comes back, there's a little trickle of blood running down his lip. Because that doesn't negate the fact that you actually caused damage, right? It's just not significant enough to have an in-game effect. To have a mechanical effect in the game. That doesn't mean that it can't still have a narrative effect in the game, right? And that's a nice cinematic moment too of, oh, I threw everything I had at this guy, and then he just comes back and stares at me. It's like, oh shit, B.A. Baracus moment. Oh god damn it, no. So what if I hit you? Let's say I hit you enough to cause 4 wounds worth of damage off that one punch.
But okay,
bam! I just dealt you 4 wounds.
Right, but you haven't yet, because there may be bennies in play.
Okay.
And
so
if
what if
there
he
are
can
bennies in play? Then we have to decide what happened.
Right. So let's say he soaks half.
Okay. So then you narrate what actually happened, not what might have happened based on the first die roll. I keep saying this over and over and over again. You have to resolve the event with all of the relevant dice rolls before you can narrate the conclusion of it.
I would expand on that and say the word you said that's most poignant to me is all relevant dice rolls. That Benny dropped and it caused the soak, but it didn't take away the 4 wounds worth of damage that were caused. You're not going to take 4 wounds worth of damage mechanically, but the damage was still caused. So it might be, your character, caught me unawares and delivers a dim mock to my sternum. And you literally hear the ribs separate as you crack my chest plate. But your back foot slipped slightly, and you didn't have as much power behind it as you thought, and you weren't able to crush my heart. Moving right along. Now we've shown the technical skill, the accuracy of the blow, and then we give that thing that changes the scene that lessens the wound, but doesn't lessen the damage dealt. It doesn't lessen the attack that was thrown. And again, it's all about training yourself to have rapid access imagination. You have to be able to, on your feet, come up with a way to describe that scene. And if you can't do it, work at it, because your game will get better.
Right. Or ask your player, hey, why didn't he take the full 4 wounds?
Ask the attacker.
Yeah,
the person dealing why the soak worked. Rather than the defender is going to have some great ideas, but the attacker is the one who just kind of got, shall we say, fucked by this roll. They're the one who just had this great moment taken away from them. Let them come up with the creative narrative around how it happened. Give that agency back to them to add to the story of what went wrong.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I would say this as a GM. If that attacker says, no, I pulled the punch.
Sure.
Intentionally at the last minute because I want to lull him in this false sense of security that I can't hurt him. As a smarts trick, on my next round. As a GM, golf clap that shit and go, that's worth +2. That's worth +2 on your
and
next
have a Benny
against him.
Yeah, and you might even give him a Benny after that.
That's
because they took the time
coming across the table to that player.
Yeah,
that player just added to the narrative, completely captured the idea of soak to damage in the narrative without just letting all the tension out of the scene. And I think that's that other side of this is people talk about, well, there's no tension because it's so swingy with the explosive dice and the bennies. Well, again, I mean, bennies are only going to interact with the game a total at most of 6 times per player if you're playing by the official rules. You're only supposed to ever give out 3 during play to an individual player. So they started with 3, they get 3 more. You've got a maximum, there of 6 moments that they've got that narrative, way to go in and go, mulligan, let's change that up. So that's a limit that you can play within as a GM by controlling that flow, making sure that you're awarding them, but you have control of how often that's going to have to come up. So it's not, you shouldn't lean toward the, well, what if side of things, just be ready to react to it when it happens. The other side, though, is quite honestly, you have to find a way to keep your narrative cinematic descriptions going to reinforce the tension in the scene, even in the moments where it's just a card draw or it's just a dice roll that we're having to wait on. Chris went off to the bathroom and we're waiting for him to come back because it's his initiative. That's your moment to narrate the thing going on in the background of the combat scene to set that tone, to keep that tension there as a GM, to keep your players hooked and wanting to hear more.
I'd say good point. Very good point. Anything in the chat room that we want to discuss?
I mean, Jamie's here for the first time in forever, following along, and says that we're not shit talking his show enough.
Well, let's take a slight divergence and talk about immersion. No, I'm just kidding. It's a joke. It's a joke. But I will say this. I mean, and the thing about the cinematic, to what degree your rule of cool exists in the game you're playing. So if I'm running a Die Hard-esque action adventure, I'm finding ways to hand out bennies. Now, at the same time, I'm imposing things like unstable platform. I'm playing my bad guys smart for cover. So they, on their round, they're up against cover, they pop out of cover, fire a machine gun, and pop back into cover. They taunt the hero while they're reloading, so they get the drop on them. They take somebody hostage. There's all these things that are happening at a very high cinematic action and tension level, and just keep ratcheting it up. But at the same time that I'm making it very, very difficult for the players, I'm also making sure the bennies are really flowing, if I can, any way I can. So having Joker's Wild in the setting is one way to kind of automate that off of your plate. The thing to remember with bennies more than anything else is bennies as a GM, you give bennies as dog treats. And I know we talked about that before, but it's appropriate. So when characters accept failure, if that's a behavior you want to see your players do more often, is go, oh no, I rolled it. They've got 10 bennies set next to them. And they go, yeah, I'm good with it. I'm going to stick with the failure. That's when I give them a benny for not re-rolling, because I want to reinforce that behavior.
Not if they have 10 bennies sitting next to them already. I mean, I'm just going to throw that out there. I have my limit as to how many bennies I want to see stacked in front of a single player. But yeah.
When a player character in roleplay sets up another person in their group to win, instead of hogging the spotlight, that person gets a benny. And make it very clear why you're giving that benny. Because when you do that, you're reinforcing, hey, this is a behavior that needs to keep happening at this table. And that person just demonstrated it, so they get a benny.
But we do actually have a question from chat, and I think it's perfect for this, because it falls right into that where we were talking about the drop earlier, where it's an abstract rule and it's the GM's call. So Art Fernandez asks, how do you handle a player using a whip in combat? The player uses it to trip and entangle. I could not find rules to handle that. I'm curious of ways to handle it. I mean, I can come up with a couple different ones off the top of my head. I do know there is at least one setting that has rules for the whip. I can't for the life of me remember which book it has it in.
I was just thinking the same thing. I'm like, what book is it in? I cannot remember. Is it in the original Rippers?
Might be.
Maybe?
I think it's actually in Deadlands, the original Deadlands Reloaded, as Lariat, like the rope.
Oh, it might be.
But I mean, the simple answer is if they want to trip, they want to do disarms, they want to do an entangle, it's the grapple rules and the push rules. And that's it. I mean, it's really simple stuff. Take the rule that already exists and just move it forward to, and the whip gives you reach to do it, etc.
I would say that you could do the same exact thing as a GM in order to abdicate that. Just flip to the power section for entangle.
That's an option.
Yeah. You could also, if the trip and entangle, you could also do as an agility trick. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sure. And for damage, I mean, strength plus a D4. And reach.
I think the only reason I wouldn't jump right to the entangle power is I don't want to take away from the guy who takes weird science or an arcane background to be able to get that power. Right. So there are some benefits that go with that I don't want to just give away. I prefer to go with something that everybody at the table could do equally, which is more grapple.
Right. But I'm just saying as a very quick and dirty guideline as to how to run it at the table, you can just flip there and substitute spell casting or arcane roll for the fighting roll, the ranged fighting roll.
Yeah. And then I would even say, depending on your setting, if you're running something that's a little more gritty, it's a straight roll. If it's something a little more pulpy, give them a +1 or a +2 for having a whip, which is designed for that action. Whips are designed for being able to reach out and grab something and pull it away, or, grabbing an ankle and knocking them on their ass. Those are great things you could do with a whip. And in a pulp game, it's going to make a lot more sense for your Indiana Jones character to have some bonuses when trying to do that stuff.
Right. Totally.
Yeah, if you're running it as a very pulpy Indiana Jones, I would do the simplest thing to do is just call it an agility trick. If they're not trying to do damage with it, they're just trying to trip or entangle them. The outcome's going to be shaken.
It's an agility trick or a fighting roll, pretty much.
Yeah, the outcome's going to be shaken, pretty much, right? On a raise or +2 to everybody else trying to do anything because of the whole trick.
Yeah, I like the new, bound and entangled rules from
Flash Gordon
for it, because I can wrap your feet together and now you can't move. Or
you're vulnerable. You're
exactly. I like that a little bit
distracted.
More than just a trick, but at the same time, that's what is your player trying to achieve? So a great example of this, the other night we were playing it in our normal Friday game, and my character rolled an ungodly stealth roll and was able to scurry up a tree where even his own party lost track of where he was. The conversation moment comes, and a member of the party rolls horrifically with a shotgun and blows the head off of one of the people they were going to talk to, and combat suddenly breaks out with people we weren't supposed to be fighting. So I asked Jared, I know I have the drop because he had already awarded that to me when I rolled the high stealth. What would it take for me to use the bow in a silent enough manner that I don't give my position away? As soon as I relayed what I wanted to achieve to the GM, it's up to Jared to figure out what mechanic he wants to use in Savage Worlds to achieve that. The one he chose is that he required I get an additional raise on my attack that you did well enough to achieve something special. And that just gave me the drop for the continuing round. He could have required a stealth roll as a multi-action. There's any number of ways he could have handled that, but your player tells you what they want to achieve, then you take the rules and assemble them together to come up with how they achieved it. you don't need a lot of extra special rules to do these things. You need the ability to take the abstract thing we have and assemble it appropriately to replicate what your players are asking for.
Right. Yeah, and Savage Worlds is bare bones enough and fast enough, the way the mechanics fit together, to allow you to easily do that. And we've talked about this before, but it bears repeating. So if a player goes, okay, well, the orc at the end of the hall is blocking our passage, so I'm going to nimbly run up to him at the last second. I'm going to run up the side of the wall, do a flip over his head, go, ha-ha, and slice his brow with my blade, so blood pours in his eyes and temporarily blinds him.
Well, I mean, that's going to be at least 3 actions, Jared. I need you to give me a running roll to get down the hallway.
-6, -6.
For the running up the wall and flipping, and then I need an attack roll.
Excuse me. Until I go, wait a minute. What is the player intending to do? What is the intent of what they just narrated? Number 1, hey, you know what? Cool narration. Great idea. Let me help you be successful at this great thing you've just come up with, so that you try more outrageous, great shit to come up with. The final intent of that is to temporarily shake the opponent. That's the whole point. Agility trick.
Yeah, but then aren't you throwing out a lot of the rules?
No, I'm applying them judiciously, because at the end of the day, the intent is not to do damage. The intent is to phase, stun, shake the enemy.
Yeah, but then all my players are going to want to do 3 and 4 actions with no penalties just because they described it.
Yeah.
Hey, Jib.
Right. Isn't that what I want in my game?
What's that phrase you always tell us, Jib, when you talk about trappings?
Well, you mean that the game cares about the impact of the thing on the rules, and what it looks and feels like is entirely your problem?
Exactamundo. I mean, that's really what this comes down to. Is, we're not talking about letting your players have the farm for free. We're saying when the player only wants the one effect and they've got this massive narration to go with it, let them have the rule of cool narration with the one little incy-pincy, effect that takes 1 action to achieve in a boring style.
I don't know. Feels like that could be a slippery slope, and they're gonna take and take and take until you can't take no more.
Wow, Jib. Chris, show us on the D12 where the player hurt you.
Oh no, I don't agree with that. Everybody's just telling me that I don't argue enough, so I'm just going to
devil's advocate.
I'm trying to argue.
So Carlin Kendrick throwed one out here. I'm going to let Jared read this one because it's specifically for him.
Uh-oh. But Uncle Jared, the multi-action penalties are there for immersion, the huddled masses says. No, I disagree. The multi-action penalty there. The multi-action.
What the fuck does immersion have to do with rules?
Multi-action penalty has nothing to do with immersion. I can guarantee you that.
No, well, see what he means by immersion. That is code for punishing your player. Immersion is code for punishment. It's a euphemism for punishment.
I think the game is more immersive if you let the player get away with that 5-minute narration of their character running down the hallway and jumping between the walls, running up the one wall, doing the backflip, slicing the eyebrow, and blood pouring in the orc's face. That is more immersive than it is to go, okay, now give me a series of dice rolls to achieve that thing. Instead, let's make one quick dice roll and let you have that great player agency immersive moment where you narrated the cool thing instead of me now narrating how it went wrong because I decided to punish you with a bunch of penalties.
Yep. Because when you decided to punish them with all those penalties, you are burying them in minutia and trying to create something representational that really should be cinematic.
Mm-hmm. But you can punish them so you guys can have the right kind of fun. Punishment leads to the right kind of fun. Punish them.
I love you, Chris.
I mean, I guess this goes back to our discussion earlier too about cinematic and notice rolls. Hey, give me a notice roll to spot the 8 ninjas hiding around the corner waiting to ambush your ass.
Boo.
Boo, you've ruined immersion. You've taken away all the surprise because now I know that the role I'm about to make is important.
Your players were very surprised when you said the 8 ninjas. And their butts all puckered.
Yeah.
Yes, they did.
You just delivered a serious case of swamp ass to your table.
And watch them burn those bennies trying to make that notice roll. Oh, shit. I've got 5. God, I've got 1 left. Oh, I don't want to get ambushed. Jesus Christ. What do I do?
The 2 rules of a notice roll. If you tell them nothing about the first notice roll of the night, I guarantee you can get half their bennies off the table on that 1 dice roll. 2, if you tell them what's around the corner, you will get the rest of those bennies off the table for that dice roll.
Well, and it plays into immersion, right? Because now the player knows what the character is about to face. And it's like the guy sitting, it's like an audience member sitting there in a horror movie watching the dumb bimbo right about to go downstairs into the dark cellar, sitting there go, no, what are you insane? No, go back upstairs. Wait, the killer's inside. Why are you running back upstairs?
Let's hide behind those chainsaws in the garage.
Right. Why are you running upstairs to hide in a closet with no lock on it when the door is 5 feet that way? What are you doing? You can get that same kind of tension and buy-in and immersion at the table with just a little, give me a notice roll to notice the 8 ninjas waiting around the corner to jump your ass.
I did the same.
That's like, oh crap, everything just died.
Wow.
Art Fernandez.
I was afraid that it was me again.
Art asked a kind of a redirect clarification on the whole run down the hallway, do the backflip, cut the orc. He goes, what about making multiple rolls only if there could be a negative result? I.e. running up to the orc trips a trap, the person slips, otherwise the roll once and that would work. And I would say, you as the GM have to decide what the hazards are, and you have to have alluded to them in those cinematic descriptions when the player came into the room. If you don't communicate the hazards to your players and they narrate something that doesn't include that hazard, you absolutely have the obligation not to say, well, that's going to be 3 dice rolls that I need from you because of X. It's, okay, be aware there's a couple of trip ropes. I'm going to need an agility check just to get there. And that's just you're moving across hostile terrain. I need an agility check because you did this. That's not me
and if
adding
they decide
extra dice rolls to the situation.
Right. And if they decide to alter their course of action once you've told them that, you let them.
Absolutely. But if it's just you described the hallway exactly as it exists and there's a hidden trap, then you tell the player that's absolutely what you do. And when you take your 3rd step, I need a blank check, whatever it is that trap requires, and you spring the trap on them. If they bypass the trap, they succeed at that, then they still only give you 1 dice roll for the whole run down the hallway, run up the wall, cut the orc, and land with the orc being shaken, because the agility trick didn't change. If they fail the trap, their action has basically been interrupted by a static object, and they don't get that action. They're dealing with whatever the trap did to them.
Right. So let's talk about doing some of the things that you see happen in movies and cinema and bring those into your game. Let's talk about the biggest quagmire potential clusterfuck of them all, and that's called in media res, or in the common parlance, in media res. Action in the middle of action at the start of a scene. So the scene starts with basically what happens in the middle of that scene, what's going to happen, and then pulls back to present day or to the end of it at some point.
You're mixing 2 different things. In media res is just the action, the the scene starts in action, and it's the you start on the left hook. The left hook connects with your jaw, and then we pull back and you see the whole bar in a brawl around you. Start, and we game from there. The other thing you're talking about is that whole the premonition. This happens, and then we back up 2 days earlier, and then we play through that. Don't ever do the second one. We've talked about this ad nauseum. Don't time travel in your game if you can avoid it. You're the GM, you can always avoid it.
Yeah, or be willing to live with the consequences if the players insist on trying to change time, but that's not your intent.
Right.
Just kind of go, okay, well, no, we weren't going to do a time travel change game, but that's what they've all decided to do. So, all right, we're going to change tact, and then, goddamn, I guess that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
But to say that, start off with a very simple fighting role or a description where combat is starting or an action is starting, and then let them kind of basically give you notice rolls to be dealt in, whether it's a surprise to them what's going on or not, and then just go ahead and start the barroom brawl.
And honestly, this is one of those that I refuse to do since playing Savage Worlds. In other role-playing games, I think it works just as well as it always has in novels and cinema, but I think for role-playing game purposes, especially in Savage Worlds, there's too much risk every time you put the players in a fight
combat.
Choose. If you're springing a fight on them that they didn't choose, it damn well better be an ambush that serves the story and not just something you're doing as filler to make the game interesting, because you're going to kill a player character on accident.
I say that way when somebody dies, it has meaning. You don't want to just have that, oops, sorry, we started you off in a barroom brawl, and I killed your character. Sorry. Good thing it doesn't take long to make a new one in Savage Worlds.
I know we ran this whole 4-hour session 0 last week, and everybody made their characters together, and you really wrote up a character that ties into the party. But this first roll of combat, in the combat that happened within the first 5 minutes of the game, just killed your character. I'm sorry, roll up a new character. It's just not fun for that player.
Here comes his twin.
No, hold on.
Here comes his twin.
Hold on. Regardless of what the outcome of the combat is, you narrate they snap awake. And it was all just a dream.
No. Don't make
bullshit. I call bullshit.
That is a bullshit answer, Jared.
Holy shit. Holy shit.
I will cut you too. I may do it anyway.
What is this pansy ass heroes never die bullshit coming out of your mouth, Jared?
This is not the final season of Dallas or whatever the hell that was.
You wake up, you go in the bathroom, and Bobby Ewing's in the shower looking at you. That's what you narrate.
Everything's fine.
No, just no. But you don't necessarily have to kill them. You don't, the dice may say they took 4 wounds, but it
could be non-lethal.
It could be non-lethal damage. You have the latitude to do that.
Yeah, there's ways to tweak it, most definitely.
There are ways to make that come out so that the event is meaningful but doesn't take the character away. But if you play the fucking dream card, you've just taken all the meaning for everything in the game away.
Well,
and I will fucking cut you.
Again, my argument here is don't lead to this with your very first scene of the very first session.
Agreed. So I'm just saying, as far as a storytelling technique in cinema, in media res is a pretty big way that you see a lot of action movies start. Like they always start right in the middle of a big action sequence before they run to credits.
Yeah, I mean, look at every James Bond movie.
Yeah.
Every James Bond movie has that first action sequence that you come into the middle of the action, and then you get the title sequence.
Something else I would add, if you're going for that cinematic feel when it comes to combat, all unarmed combat, even if they have, martial artist, is non-lethal unless the player says otherwise. And all armed combat is lethal unless the player says otherwise. You set those two things out as an expectation so that they know when they swing that sword, there's going to be a blood streak across the other guy. When they take a punch, they might just knock his lights out. You set those expectations early in the game so that they know that's the flavor of game you're playing.
Right.
That way you don't have questions later on of, well, no, I meant for that to be non-lethal, or no, I really did mean for that to kill the guy.
Right. And I would say this too, if you're going to do an in media ray, do something like that, make it interesting. So for example, let's say it starts off with a barroom brawl. Have one of the NPCs, if they get a good punch in on one of the player characters, have them push them to the ground and then go, play along. I'm trying to make an impression here. And then stand back up. Do that follow my lead kind of interesting interplay with the NPC. So it's not just a combat.
Yeah.
It actually has a story element that is there for a reason to draw the characters and player characters in.
When one of your players does that, play along.
All right. So anything else we want to talk about? And we've covered Benny's. We've covered, Savage Worlds happens. I just meant to watch up and just punch the guy. Holy crap. I rolled all the damage ever. Holy shit.
Yeah, I like Dave's idea. I had never really thought about that, but I really do like Dave's idea of saying right at the beginning, unarmed combat is non-lethal unless you say that you're really trying to use a lethal. I really like that. I think that would benefit the game.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. At the same time, if a person gets a really spectacular hit or does really spectacular damage, again, this is a moment to say, okay, so what are you trying to accomplish with this? Where are you trying to get to with this? And they get what they wanted. They earned it with the dice.
I think I've only ever been in one game where someone rolled a fuckload of damage on an attack and it killed the opponent, and the player was unhappy with that outcome. I think I've only been in that situation once. Chris will remember it because it was unfortunately his character that had someone play an action card. He ends up just biting the wrist off of the guy. But it's one of those things. It's not going to happen often, but if you've already set that tone, you don't run into but I didn't mean to kill him, or you don't run into no, I really needed him to be dead. Okay, then you should have declared that you were drawing a knife to end him, or put it on the brass knuckles, or snap it. You have to declare that what you're doing is lethal or non-lethal. If you set that tone early, it resonates. But I think the last thing I would throw on the pyre of, the whole cinematic discussion, brain fart right on my head.
Something about Vikings. He was saying about a pyre, throwing something on the pyre. I'm picturing Vikings.
I'd like to say that I concur with Dave on his last point.
I'm going to wholeheartedly disagree, just preemptively.
I feel strongly both ways.
Yeah, I'm gonna give Dave a moment to collect and throw this out there. Depending on, figure out as a GM, survey the players, figure out what your cinematic universe is, what it's like, what some of the tropes are, and then apply Savage Worlds accordingly. So, for example, let's say you're playing a Marvel or DC level Supers universe game. You could declare that just basic tossing each other around into buildings or falling off skyscrapers or any damage not caused by a super power directly results in bumps and bruises only. So a character could be flung off the Empire State Building, pile driven into the ground by a bus or whatever. And instead of them rolling for wounds, they just give you a vigor roll to avoid a level of fatigue from bumps and bruises. Figure out what knockback is. How do the physics of things work in that game, and what are the impact, and then dial that in so that it fits the tone. Any luck, Dave? Nope. All right.
Empty head syndrome.
That's okay. It'll kick in just as I'm giving the closing. I guarantee it. So until next time, this is Jared Savage Daddy Gunning for Jib,
Yo,
Chris, and Dave. Anything? Saying keep rolling and stay savage.